Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Leona and I are very pleased to be making this presentation to the 4th International Symposium on Intergenerational Transmission of Minority Languages. We're going to start immediately with our PowerPoint. As you can see, our title is Supporting Intergenerational Language Transmission through the Physical and Digital Landscapes of Early Childhood Centres. And we think that this is a necessity for equity today. As you can also see, we have lots of collaborators who have supported us in this research, including Leah de Vocht van Alpen, Una Cunningham, Saili Akuso, Tufalasi Tarini, Jeanette King, and many others, including the Early Childhood Centres and all our participants. And we'd like to thank them and acknowledge them. We'd also like to say welcome to you in your language, but we don't know your language. Here's a few that we've observed in one of the Early Childhood Centres, where on whiteboard in the entrance, they made sure that languages were welcome and were seen. This is our whakatauki for today. It's a Māori proverb and it comes from the New Zealand curriculum. And it indicates that the language is very important to the individual, to every individual, with an inspiration and something that's a tonga, something precious. The best way to talk about linguistic landscapes is to give you an example. And so we have one that Leona's made with help from all of our centres. I think you'll agree with us that looking at the digital landscapes and the physical landscapes of those early childhood centres and the library that supports them is very inspirational. We can see lots of languages in there and they've been carefully and thoughtfully chosen. We'll provide some more illustrations as we talk about our research. So why is the landscape important? Well, landscapes in a child's life encourage acceptance and use of their languages, and they support family engagement. And we know that that's essential in early childhood. The linguistic landscape is the visibility, and it shows the languages that are relevant or salient in that location. And it reflects the policy, both informal and formal, and influences how languages are perceived and therefore used. It's embarrassing to use a language that doesn't appear to be accepted in the location. And linguistic landscapes go beyond what is seen to incorporate text, as you've seen in that video, images, objects, and people over time and space. And these days, the digital world is part of that space. So we're talking about physical and virtual spaces. So languages seen or languages used, and I'm quoting here something that Una Cunningham presented in one of our workshops with community here. The significance because it shows how the people who are, feel like in power, the people who arrange the landscape, support and value children's languages. And it can also influence how they're perceived and used. we've got examples of where the landscape has got additional details for adults to support them in their use, because of course not every adult is expert in every language. In fact, that's a point of real difficulty for educators. And as Te Whāriki and their whānau move around early childhood centres, they draw conclusions about the relative importance. In New Zealand, I'm using the Māori language, Te Whāriki being the children and whānau being family. And it's important in our country to actually mix languages to show that they are acceptable and to keep alive what is, as in many Indigenous languages, a language that is endangered, and along with it, the culture. So the linguistic landscape indicates what's socially supported within that context. And you'll see literature here that we are quoting. Well, Una's book, Growing Up with Two Languages, has been quite a revelation for me and for many families about transmitting their language. And it's important to transmit that language because there are benefits for the bilingual children. It's very hard to be bilingual without additional languages spoken in your context. But once you are bilingual, you have better chances for life outcomes. And these include economic, social, and cultural. And the reason is, as we've seen in the list here, bilinguals can communicate with more people. They have more cultural experiences. We see it as an enriched context in which to grow up. They can also connect with their older relatives, particularly where they can speak their language, and then they can learn more about their own culture. The economic advantages come from better use of language, but also in a very globalized world, we need multiple languages to work in such globalized economies. There's also indications from cognitive and brain research that people think more flexibly if they start off with more than one language, just the way the brain develops in multilingual contexts. And for the same reason, they may have a closer relationship with their parents, as people talk about the heart language being easier to communicate with. And for teenagers in particular, they have a surer sense of who they are and where they belong, because it's very hard when you're trying to grow up and you don't understand the language and culture that other people might expect you to have. New Zealand's rather different. Its Māori name is Aotearoa, so we use the two words together, Aotearoa New Zealand. It's linguistically, and I'm quoting here from a national report, super diverse. We have not only the Indigenous Māori language, but we hold some of the rich populations of other threatened languages, so they can bring that to their children, and it makes the intergenerational transmission of languages even more important. So children growing up with more than one language in their ecosystems have linguistic repertoires that straddle these languages. And so multilingualism is embedded. And in New Zealand, the early childhood curriculum, Te Whāriki, celebrates this and encourages it. And we have a nationwide research program called A Better Start, e Tipu area, and that Better Start research chose our theme, amongst others, to research its potential impact. So, what do we know already? Well, we know that there are positive aspects for bilingualism, lifelong benefits for well-being and education, as we've mentioned. There's benefits for Māori language revitalization, but what I haven't mentioned so far is that the digital world can also increase access to languages and potentially make it easier for children to grow up bilingually. But there are negative aspects too. As many of you will know, minority languages are easily lost in landscapes dominated by English or another language, but particularly English. And research methods and measures, particularly of language acquisition, or I should say including language acquisition, have an English bias. And the other thing that we know perhaps increasingly well is that the digital world can distract. People can become addicted to social media. They can become addicted to other aspects of it. And children are very attracted by games and media, digital media. So I'm not going to go through our research in detail, but what I want to share with you is that we have gathered linguistic landscapes not once but twice, and we've looked at the educational environment in early childhood centres, and not just the physical environment, but also the digital world. And we've talked and learned from early childhood centres and primary schools and others about their strategies for emergent bilinguals in the digital world. Over 1 year between the gathering of our first and our second linguistic landscape, we found a change. And we can see from this bar chart that the amount of exhibits, if you like, with only the English language in them dropped, whereas those with other languages increased. There was a slight drop in Samoan only, but amongst these 6 early childhood centres, this change was statistically significant. So now Leona is going to talk to you about some of the things that we observed.
So over the year, the displays in the ECE centres had evolved and developed. So the previous display we saw of the multilingual welcome on the whiteboard in that particular centre, that had then developed to a more complex display, including children's flags, welcomes, and a map showing where the children came from as well. And this was located in the main learning area, and it was at the child's height as well. So the whiteboard display was mostly at adults' height to engage with parents, whereas this was at the child's level, engaging the children and the whānau, and using multilingual greetings and talking about their place and belonging.
And we saw that in most of the centres, didn't we?
It was a common display amongst all of the centres to have a multilingual greeting. And then also they used the technology to sort of expand out from the ECE centre. In this one example, centre shared with me how one family who was really supporting the topic that they were doing about Aotearoa, which is Mount Cook in New Zealand, and they went on a family trip, a hikoi, to see Aotearoa, and while they were down there, the child just spontaneously started singing a song that they had been singing in the centre, and the family had the opportunity to record this, and then also able to share this back with the ECE centre, who then put that video on the dashboard of the ePortfolio system so that it could be shared across all of the whānau from the centre. So it was a good use of using digital technology to share the child's bilingual language development and culture.
And in a way that was inspiring to others too, wasn't it?
And during our engagement with centres, we often collaborated with centres to co-construct displays for their centre to further enhance their bilingual language development. This example here was based on the teacher's previous practice of using the child's digital photo to incorporate along with language, so that when the centre sent this display home to the whānau, that she could be assured that it would take pride and place within the home, especially with the child's image on it. So we worked with the centre and thought how we could enhance this idea, and we created QR codes which linked to audio files of singing the waiata, because some of the feedback from whānau was that their children were coming home singing, but yet they didn't know the words or what the meaning of the song was. So a part of the ECE's work was in supporting the development of Māori language in the home. So the QR code was a really good approach for stretching across the centres and home. And one centre who we collaborated with, they went beyond by developing an app, which I think we might look at a little bit further on. But this is our blog and our website, the Emergent Bilinguals in a Digital World. From our research, we found that a lot of the centres weren't really aware of the children's digital experiences at home. So there was a lot of talk and concern about the potential for digital technology use to distract from the important conversations that were necessary to develop children's language. And a lot of teachers shared their own personal experiences with their own grandchildren and children about their struggles with digital technology use. So they could kind of relate to how parents may be struggling, but there was little sharing of information about the day-to-day uses of digital technology. By not knowing what the children's digital experiences were, they had difficulty engaging with the children who were perhaps playing and using languages relating to the games. So this example here where two boys who weren't participating in the hospital play that teachers had set up, they were playing together using gaming talk about a game that they'd been playing. And the teacher observed that another child came along and couldn't enter into that play because they didn't have any knowledge. So she said to her it was like a whole new language that was coming out of the digital world, and that unless you knew the language, you're actually socially ostracised in a way.
Yeah, and the other children were sort of ostracised as well. And mostly those languages in the games are in English, and that's one of the problems that we have. English tends to dominate in the digital world, doesn't it?
And the majority of centres, they were using an online ePortfolio system to share learning stories with home. This is an example Educa that was used, and so you can see the different aspects that Educa can be good for. It's an assessment platform. The exemplars can be shared, particularly for families that had family living abroad. They could share that with family in another country. And then they had analytics as well, which was helpful for the ECE teachers to see, and digital citizenship. And the teachers struggled when they first introduced the online portfolio. In some ways, it kind of excluded children if they had introduced the e-portfolio but yet got rid of the paper version. So for a lot of centres, they reintroduced the paper portfolio so that it would include the children. And they found that getting parents to sign up to the ePortfolio was difficult, but as the teachers' engagement increased over the year, they found that parent engagement also increased. So as their confidence grew, parents' confidence grew as well.
So these portfolios and the before them, the paper versions are a sort of formative assessment for young children, and that isn't, I think, the case in every country. And to me, I think it's interesting too to understand that how much further this goes, that it can spread further, and it causes additional issues about who's got access to what in terms of social media, but also what languages you can use in here. All the interface we're looking at there is in English. So if your home language was Samoan, this could be quite difficult to get your head around.
It did offer the opportunity to form a partnership with home, and there's definitely lots of opportunity for family to put their languages into the learning stories that were on the ePortfolio, and definitely across all the centres, teachers were motivated to incorporate home languages even if it's just greetings and well done sort of language, to encourage the family to start using their home languages within that ePortfolio.
So then they could add more to it. So we recently published an article that was stimulated by a special issue of this Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. There's been a lot of concern about overexposure of young children to digital media. And that's not what we found. We found that the early childhood centres were very responsible in their use, and in fact limited it a lot. So we have some recommendations, although we're still continuing our research. And like others before who've become concerned about the overuse of digital media, we think that we need more guidance for adults, including parents, but also community members and educators, on how to mediate the digital world with young children, to guide them so that they can be safe and learn about digital citizenship. But it has to be appropriate for them and their age and their language. We're pretty sure that an awful lot of software needs development and interface design for two reasons. One is to increase the visibility and use of multilingual children's languages, but also the way that the parents can mediate, because very often the software is designed for the child to use it alone, and that shouldn't be really what's happening with children under 6 years of age. And we also need, Leona mentioned that the educators were pleased to engage in this research, happy to share their strategies. And we observed a number of strategies that are already in operation with the Māori language, so they could be extended to additional languages for many of these centres who could have more than 20 languages of children's languages in there. And so we need more professional development, and we've produced some of that so that it can be used, pop up when the centres are wish to use it, but that's also relevant for parents and extended family. And it's fairly clear that we need more research in this area, extending the evidence and its dissemination. So we'll be very interested to hear from participants in this symposium of things that might guide our research, of also about other research. We're conducting a literature review to inform the next stage. And we're interested in the link between, or if you like, the convergence between health and educational research that is occurring in this area, as well as in terms of design. So we hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to talking with you online.